Hi everyone! Today I felt like coloring these small round landscapes in my coloring book, and this time I'm using acrylic markers. I've already used the same type of markers before when I colored some flowers, and I really enjoyed them. These are the same markers, just a different set. Arrtx likes to organize their markers by color themes, and it's always good to pick the set that suits you best. Before I used a 36 color set that came in a green box, and the one I'm trying today has 60 markers and comes in a cute pink box. I'll just show you the difference really quickly and do a small swatch of all the colors. As you can see, the colors are nicely chosen. Even within the same hue, you get a lot of variety. For example, in the greens you have warm, slightly grayish tones, and also cooler, more blue-leaning ones. So you really get a nice range to play with. When I convert the colors to black and white to check their values, you can really see they're well balanced. Having that range of values is important because when you want nice contrast in your painting or coloring, that's what makes everything pop. Of course, if you only use acrylic markers for coloring books, covering lines, and similar things, then a smaller set will work just fine. I personally really like Arrtx markers, but every type has its own little quirks. With these, I noticed they stay wet for quite a long time, so I tend to use them more in a painting style. You can add a bit of water and a brush, and the color flows beautifully. They just take a little longer to dry. Because of that, sometimes one color might slightly blend over another, but it's all very easy to control, and for me, it's actually really fun. The only tiny thing I'd gently complain about is that sometimes while I'm coloring, the body of the marker starts to unscrew itself a little, so I just need to tighten them again. It's nothing dramatic, but I want you to know these small things, especially if you like to work quickly and don't want anything distracting you while you're in your flow. All in all, they are lovely to work with. These acrylic markers are the ones that stay much wetter, and they're definitely more for people who like to experiment a bit and paint with colors. So if you're like using a brush for small corrections or for a more painterly look, I think you'll really enjoy these acrylic markers. And today I'll be working on these tiny little landscapes, so let's dive in. Since these markers have such beautiful, vibrant colors, I'm going to create a bright little sunset in warm yellows and oranges. Because they don't dry very quickly, sometimes it's enough to just tap the paint lightly with my finger to soften the transition lines. I'll try to follow the drawn lines to shape the clouds, and I'll add a bit of red acrylic too, just to get a slightly more dramatic look. Right from the start, I have to mention that it's much better to work on completely dry paper and avoid adding new layers on top of wet ones. I'm pretty impatient here, and you'll see why it's usually better to lay down one layer, maybe blend in a second color quickly, and then let it dry. Too much wet paint can slightly damage the paper, and you might get tiny lumps or texture on the surface. To avoid that, just give your layers a moment to dry. Acrylic markers can be layered beautifully, but you need a bit of patience and to pay attention to how your paper reacts. You can use a brush when you need something a bit less dreamy, but still without harsh lines. I'm also adding a grayish-blue shade, just to explore different tones and plan ahead how this bright sky will blend into the cooler mountains below. These are such beautiful little round landscapes, and I'm trying to follow the lines. But honestly, I'm not always sure what Leila originally intended to draw, and I think that's completely normal with illustrations like this in coloring books. Sometimes you just have to stop overthinking and follow the lines in the way you see them. Maybe I'm not following every detail exactly the way it was meant, but it really doesn't matter. I'm going for the look of steep, tall mountains, and later I'll make sure the peaks are naturally facing the sun so they appear brighter. I'll place some darker colors in the shadowed parts of the mountains and maybe add a little snow on the tops. As for the colors, since I started with the warmer tones, I won't push too much contrast here. I'll keep the darker, cooler browns more in the background and use the warmer, lighter colors on the trees and smaller hills in the front. Now this part really felt a bit overwhelming with all the tiny details. Acrylic markers are a fast and easy medium. You can just follow the lines and it works beautifully. But when you get to very detailed areas in a coloring book, it's easy to get stuck on one small spot. Sometimes you just have to accept that you can't color every single detail, even if you use a small brush to control the acrylic markers in the tiniest places. Unlike pencils, which you can sharpen and control very precisely, with paint you have to simplify and focus more on playing with the color. I wish I could have added a few lighter shades to the front parts here. It feels like I lost a bit of good value, but I got so caught up in the tiny details that I just wanted to finish them quickly. Honestly, these areas feel a little too small for my usual coloring style. So I'll give myself a little help. Once everything dries well, I'll go back and fix certain parts with colored pencils. I'll deepen the darkest parts a bit and separate the trees from the hills with darker colored pencils just to give everything a bit more clarity and texture. The trees in the front need to look a little sharper, and the mountains and hills in the distance should stay softer. You don't need to see every detail back there. And I'll also add a soft vignette around the edges to make the warm yellows and red trees stand out more. Since we have bluish water in the middle, I'm adding a touch of blue to the sky as well, just for a nicer overall composition. Finishing everything is my favorite part of coloring. Sometimes I step back and look at the page from a distance to see what could be improved. It really helps with these detailed sections. At the end, I'll blur the distant areas just a tiny bit with a cooler light blue pencil or a bluish gray. It gives a nice impression of mountains fading into the distance and slightly cooler air. I hope that helped bring everything together a bit. The second landscape I'll color in a very similar way. It looks a little easier because there aren't as many tiny details and I genuinely enjoy working with markers, so this will be a nice relaxing one. In the second image, I'm adding a lot of blue to the sky. I think the colors will match nicely when we look at the whole page and see how it connects with the first landscape. But here you can immediately see how I totally overdid it by layering color one on top of another, exactly the thing I said you should be careful about earlier. I simply added too much paint while trying to use white to create the clouds, and the paper got too wet. So if you're a beginner, I'd recommend adding the blue first, letting it dry, and then gently adding the white for the clouds wherever you want them. You can soften the edges with your finger or a brush to blend everything nicely. But definitely try not to go too aggressively with the markers, one after another, while the paper is still wet. I'll try to dry this area and later fix the clouds with colored pencils. Hopefully this little mistake will fade away a bit.
I'm using very similar or even the same colors as in the first landscape, just arranged a bit differently so everything fits my eye nicely. But you can already see how much more natural this second picture feels for me to color because there aren't so many tiny details, so I could just focus on placing the colors and using the brush to define certain parts. And again, I'll do a little touch-up with colored pencils to define the smaller areas and add a bit more texture, some grasses, little flowers, and a few clearer details. These markers are really lovely to work with. The paint stays wet a bit longer, so if you enjoy a simple painterly approach, maybe this is your sign to try them. The set of 60 has more than enough colors. You really won't feel like anything is missing because the selection is so well thought out. The colors are vibrant and beautiful, and unlike last time, the markers didn't unscrew while working, so I'm not sure
if I just got used to it or if Arrtx changed something, but this time everything worked exactly as it should. I genuinely like how Arrtx markers behave. I know you often ask which markers to choose because Arrtx has quite a few sets. This type, the liquid ink acrylic markers, is perfect for someone who enjoys flowy color and a bit more of a painting approach. You can really rely on a brush with this. I hope you found the video helpful for your own creations. If you did, a like or a comment would really help me keep going, and I'll be back soon with another tutorial. You can find all the info in the video description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.